I'm James, and this is Producing Fun, a podcast about making games from a product perspective. Welcome to Producing Fun. My guest this week is Mike Bonet, a game podcaster based in New York. Mike has been podcasting in the board game world for a long time, recording his first episode way back in 2008, long before podcasts enjoyed the popularity they do today. And when he started, by his own admission, he knew nothing about hobby games. 14 years and 300 episodes or so later, that's very far from the case. Mike is now known for his long, in-depth explorations of the many and subtle design decisions behind various games. And the names of famous designers and publishers litter the Who, What, Why guest list. From Jamie Stegmaier, several times, to Matt Leacock, and Elizabeth Hargrave to Isaac Childress. But it's not just famous names. Mike is keen to speak to anyone with an interesting story to tell. I have to give Mike the credit for getting me into podcasting too. Early in 2021, he interviewed me about Magnate. While I was already an avid listener to a range of shows, it was being on the receiving end of Mike's effortless interview manner that made me realize just what a great experience recording a podcast could be. We were able to get far deeper into a wide range of subjects than I'd experienced before, and I felt completely at ease to do so. After having given it some idle thought, this was the spark of inspiration to finally give it a go myself. As you might expect, Mike is just a lot of fun as a guest. In this week's episode, we get into a range of topics, including his initially chaotic journey into podcasting, how to listen to guests, the role of podcasting in game media today, and his tips for engaging podcasters effectively if you're looking to expand your platform as a game publisher. If you're interested in getting into podcasting, or you just want to be invited onto a game podcast, this episode is for you. We join just as I've told Mike how he inspired me to pick up the microphone.
Ooh, that's nice to hear.
Yeah, 100%, because you're naturally very easygoing nature in terms of, like, you made me feel really at ease as a guest. It just felt like a really great conversation. It flowed so naturally.
That's on purpose.
It's really good. It's very much like, if I think about how you work on your podcast, it's actually very professional tier in terms of it's the very natural way you make the conversation. And I would say quite a lot of game podcasts don't quite achieve that. In fact, actually, I'd say the majority of podcasts I listen to, even outside of games, don't achieve that because they tend to be a little bit stilted. It's a bit like someone's got their very exact list of questions and they're going one, and then there's like an awkward pause, question two. And that approach can work sometimes, I think, because it means that you've got this situation where if there are really particularly key topics you want to cover and you've done your research, then that can be a good way to get those topics out of the guest. But at the same time, it's I think, a less enjoyable experience, at least from my side as a guest. And B, I don't know, it's certainly in my experience, I don't know how other people you've spoken to like this, and certainly as a listener yourself, it doesn't feel like the optimal listening experience either.
I think it's the way I am on the show is it's intentional, as natural as it is. It's also very intentional. I'm like, I like the people on the show to feel like they're just having a chat, not having to worry about performing. I find the act of like performing for the internet to be really annoying, even though I have my own side comedy thing where I am performing, but that's fine because it's all constructed and that's okay. But like, I think what happens too with the other shows, because I was listening to a podcast this morning as I was driving my son to daycare, and it also sounds to me like it's in the editing. Like they might have been having a natural conversation, but like at some point they cut at a point that they think is appropriate for the guest's response, and then you just get and now I want to ask you about your children. What is it like? And you're like, the questions seem a little disjointed, but I sometimes think it's the editing. Like there might have been more natural transitions, but they got cut out. And I'm lazy, and I don't really want to edit at all. Editing takes a while. I don't really want to edit, so instead we just, even back in the day when I started the show, we just left all the transitions in. So in my show, you also get a lot of the awkward. Yeah. So what I was thinking of, hold on, I forgot the question. Like I have all those like interjections because I just leave them. But I do think they make for like a more natural conversation.
Yeah, and I think that it is both something that projects authenticity, but actually is more authentic, because there's something about the fact that if you're speaking to someone continuously for such a long period of time, it is, I think, slightly more difficult to hide things. And I guess I don't mean that in a way where someone's being deliberately deceptive exactly at all. I mean it just in terms of we have this natural thing where we don't want to necessarily instantly give of ourselves and just open up completely. That's just natural human behavior. And if you've got a nice long continuous conversation and you make someone feel at ease, they're much more likely to just open up in that way. And it's
And
actually,
like oh god.
no, go for it.
I was gonna say, and they don't feel like they're performing, so they feel like they can let their guard down. And it's not like on my show, it's not like I'm ever asking anybody anything accusatory or aggressive. The most like accusatory I've ever been with on a bunch of episodes with Jamie Stegmaier. I don't know why it was always him. It wasn't a bad thing. It was just that like I would ask a question and he would be like, yeah, I don't really know why we did that. He's like, that's a criticism we get sometimes, but like, I never really thought about why we did it that way. And I'm like, oh, sorry. I wasn't trying to like accuse you of having done a poor job in some way. I was just asking, like the question came to mind and I thought that's interesting. But I do think you get like people don't feel like, especially on my shows, people don't feel like they're being accused of anything or that they're there to like perform really. One of the best examples I have is the audio is maybe I have the audio recorded somewhere. I don't know. Everything that is not for the show, everything between the moment when I read my intro and when I say we're done, everything beyond that, even if it gets recorded, never sees the light of day. I never, ever, that just dies in my hard drive because that's all. Sometimes we talk about things and like, it's not big things, but one of the best examples of somebody, I got off topic, but one of the best examples of somebody being complimenting me in that respect about the easy nature of the show was Henning Ludvigsen. He's a Norwegian artist. He did the tiles for Mansion of Madness, the new edition of Mansion of Madness. He did the tiles for Imperial Assault and a bunch of other games. I asked him if he'd want to be on the show, and he was like, "Well," he's like, I maybe. He's like, I don't know. He was like his English was fine, but he was like, I think maybe apprehensive about having a lengthy off the cuff conversation in English. I was like, it'll be okay. It'll be fine. Like, and at the end he went, well, that was really easy going. He's like, well, I was like, I told you it'll be okay. We're just going to chat. No worries. No performance necessary.
Well, I mean, that's it, isn't it? Is that suddenly that went from being a probably more terrifying experience, particularly if you're not your native language and you're having to be interviewed about something, to suddenly something that is, much easier to deal with. So you're getting the best out of the guest. Well, if they are more comfortable, they are more likely to share how they feel about things. And what's interesting is that I think about some of the most successful podcasts in the world actually tend to work more on that basis rather than being very highly edited. Like particularly when it comes to interview type podcasts. Like if you're think about who are some of the, obviously you've got, the biggest name in the world would be someone like Joe Rogan, but you've also got people like I would say maybe a rising star podcaster, Lex Fridman, if you've heard any of his stuff. He interviews lots and lots of people. He did an interview recently with Mark Zuckerberg. He interviews historians, he interviews politicians. He's got some huge names that come through on his podcast. His style is very different to yours. He's always like asking very often very deep, difficult to unpack questions, and then just letting the guests really like just sit with this big like philosophical question for a bit before they kind of reply. But once it's underway, it's again very much like quite a naturally edited thing. And I would say in the podcast episodes, if they are edited, you can't tell that they're edited. It's like super invisible. And for me, we do a little bit of editing on Producing Fun in terms of, because I record the intro at the beginning, just because I found that's a nice way of doing a minute summary of what I think people are going to get out of it to kind of sell them on the episode a little bit sometimes.
That's popular. I never do that, but that's popular.
Yeah.
I always sometimes think I should do it, but not.
Well, it does. I'll tell you one thing that's really interesting for me, from my point of view, this, it does add quite a lot of complexity to the production process. Even just doing that means, well, okay, I've got to kind of go through this episode summary at the end, work out what are the key points I wanted to bring out, write a scripted intro. I do it as like a short, like page thing where I'm then writing a scripted intro for it. And by the time I've added that, like overall, that's got to be an extra hour's work minimum for each episode. So immediately it's like, well, again, now you're making the decision. Neither of us are being paid to do this, right? Like a
No.
big scale. It's not like it's our job.
That would be wonderful.
That would be really amazing, right?
That would be great.
That was our job. We could just then like doing that kind of thing is just like no, an extra hour, no worries, right? And maybe you're knocking off.
Oh my gosh,
you're looking at several episodes a week, but we can't have time to do it. So it is quite a big additional expense. But I did a little poll on Twitter recently to see if the regular listeners, if they were, how they felt about it, and it was like 100%. Please don't change. Keep the intro recorded separately. And I was like, okay, all right. Well, I will not going to change this.
You know what you could think about doing is just right after the episode ends, like right after the interview's over, just write down, just handwrite the main points as you think. I don't know when you record it. Like, I don't know if you record it like a week or so later or something, but if you do it right at the end, although that's not always like feasible, because sometimes you're like, yep, I got to go right after this episode ends. So
this is another challenge I've had in terms of practically with the podcast is scheduling. You kind of want to do it at that point. Been really interesting. And I remember we had a conversation just when I started about getting some tips, and you kind of helped me out a little bit with a few thoughts about things, ways to approach it, which was really, really helpful because it's been so useful to learn from you a little bit around those things.
Good to hear.
Is that is quite challenging when you're scheduling it then. I also think there's a degree to which there's some helpful distance that one can get a little bit by sort of taking the time out to then think, well, actually, what were the kind of highlights for me in reflection of like that episode? I mean, the one that has just been published at the time that we're talking today has one that really several moments, that one, they kind of stuck out in the episode themselves. Basically, a pair of game designers who worked together at a UK company called Stone Sword Games. They really, I mean, my God, their commitment to making great quality product is out of this world. They have something like 7 3D printers in their office just so they can endlessly iterate miniatures to be like, no,
that's a lot of printers,
right, just to get them right. So like they were committed for example, for their samurai game, they were doing things like going to the Royal Armories Museum and like consulting with them to make sure that they had like designed the swords correct to the 17th to 17th century Japan and this kind of thing. So they were really interested, very committed to that. And several times in that conversation, various things came out that were like, oh wow, I'd never considered this from that perspective before, like at all. And it was like a really big kind of revelation on a couple of times. So I guess as well, sometimes they stand out, but sometimes the other conversation I have with people, and it's like, actually, the thing that was most interesting was X or Y. And it's useful to then I found that as a kind of as a thing.
That makes sense. I gotta say that adding of extra time, especially to a show you don't get paid for, that you do for fun, like as a hobby, that adding extra time is always one of those things. I have on now 3 occasions, very infrequently have I lost the audio. I want to say maybe I've only lost the audio once on a podcast, like the raw audio. But now on 3 occasions, this web thing I use called Zencaster corrupted my audio so badly that I had to go back and re-record, and it was very annoying. And on 2 of those occasions so far, I have re-recorded. One episode is actually still just sitting in my hard drive because I don't feel like mustering the energy to re-record my side of the audio because it was, I think, 3 hours of me like listening to myself. You wouldn't think it's that long, but I have to like listen to what I say, and then I have to like re-say it in a way that's not exactly, but I also lose a little bit of the like naturalness of the conversation because I end up having to cut out all the little like, oh yeah, well, that's interesting. Like I just cut them out because I'm not going to, if I recorded every single one of those, I'd go crazy.
Oh yeah.
But that's one place where you're like,
it's difficult even to do authentically, right? Like it's difficult to even make the natural reactions in the time. Recording those, It's so difficult to do those. Like
in my most recent episode with Taylor Schuss, there was a small joke at one point, and I just like when I went back to listen, I just cut the joke because I was like, it was funny in the moment. Now that I have to re-say it, it just like it sounds awkward. So I'm just said, forget it.
That makes a lot of sense. So that you've only lost the audio like a couple of times. Out of how many episodes is that? Because you've been doing this for a long while, right?
How many episodes is that's a really good question.
I feel like I know I'm in the presence of an experienced podcaster at this point. You don't know how many it is.
I have that's 100. That's 200. That's 240. That's probably 50 episodes. That's 3. I'm probably over 300 episodes.
Wow.
Maybe 300 individual episodes. Not necessarily 300 guests, because there's some people have returning guests. But yeah, I started podcasting in 2008 by happenstance, and then it wasn't until 2009 that my co-host at the time and we decided to start interviewing people, which we had no idea what we were doing, but we started interviewing people, and then after that, except for like a 2-year break, when I went from one co-host to another co-host between seasons 7 and 8, except for that, I've been recording since 2000, and I've been interviewing since 2009. So it's about 300 episodes.
Does that make your podcast the longest running podcast in the history of games, of modern tabletop games, at least?
I don't think so. I think the Dice Tower has me beat. Definitely. I am one of the longest though. Like, just whether people know who I am or not. Like I have been recording, like for every podcast that crops up or every like show that pops up, I'm like, I've been recording by probably 5 or so years longer than a lot of them. Cause it's just like, I don't know. I started doing it. My friend really, we were on this website called Fear the Boot. She was on this website called Fear the Boot.
Fear the Boot.
Yeah. I don't even remember. It was like an RPG forum or something. I don't remember anything about it. Apparently it still exists. She was discussing D&D with the people on the website, like on the forum, and was very mad because they said the rules, they said the D&D, the point of D&D was to do all this like role playing about diplomacy and like whatever, all this sort of role playing stuff. And she was like, no, the point is to kick in the door and kill the monsters and steal their stuff. And she was like, the rules state that. So she's like, do you want to start a podcast? And do you want to like, and she would talk to me about it. And I'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then like, and so she's like, do you want to start a podcast? I was like, okay. So we like recorded on my like Mac computer. We had no microphone. We used like the native microphone on the computer.
Oh, wow. So it must have been pretty scratchy audio quality back then, right?
No, not too bad. Like it wasn't the worst. It wasn't the worst. I actually found on an old hard drive, I found all of our old show notes for like, because we ended up like, we started off in this like reactionary, and I was like, yeah, you're right. I was like, totally right. That's exactly what the game is supposed to be, blah, blah, blah. And it was very reactionary. And then like we started then like deciding we were going to analyze games, and we used this thing called MDA, which is the mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics.
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
Framework. Yeah. I think it's really like used for video games more, but
yeah, certainly. I think that's where it was originally deployed, and it's a kind of analytical framework, right, for analyzing games from these kind of 3 levels.
Yeah, the thing was, we would look at like, it wasn't like hobby games mostly, like it was like Monopoly and Life, and so like there's a lot of mass market games. Because whether people know, people may not know this. I was not in the hobby when I started. I didn't even know there was a hobby. I didn't even know that existed. I had played Settlers. I had played Puerto Rico. I had played, I think, Flux and Munchkin and Zombies. I had played a few Euro games, or sort of hobby games, but I didn't know there was like a hobby. Like I had no idea. And then it wasn't until like grad school that I like learned. My friend was like taught me what Carcassonne was, and I was like, what is this thing? And then I bought Carcassonne, and that was took off.
And suddenly you were hooked.
And suddenly, yeah, when I went away in 2012 and then I came back in 2014, changing the name of the show. I went from the Ninja vs. Pirates podcast because that was our game. My friend and I had also designed a game.
Right.
And we tried to sell
Ninja vs. Pirates. And was this an RPG game as well?
No, this was like a card game. It was
Ah.
a speed card game about putting down bases and trying to end the game with more bases out than the other person. And so you had bases, and then so you could be the ninja or the pirate or the pirates, and you could put the bases down, and the pirates had like ships, and the ninjas had like these sort of pagoda looking icons. And then you'd put like a ninja in front of a base, like a character, like a pirate would protect the base. And then there was like the ninja had like a ninja sword or something, and the pirate had like a gun. And then like the pirate also had like a cannonball, and it was like the ninja sword could take out the pirate, and then whatever the ninja's big blast thing was took out the base. And it was just a speed game that you played as fast as you could. And then you threw the end card down to hope that you won it.
Right. Oh, okay. Interesting. So like a really fast kind of light card game thing.
Super fast, super light. Not necessarily a game I would try to publish today. We took like the idea of whatever we thought ninjas were. We just were like, sure, that. Like it was like the veneer of ninjas.
You weren't going to a museum to do historical research on.
Absolutely not. I was not asking about like the length, the like exact length of like weapons that ninjas used. We just were like, ninjas use ninja stars. Like it was like very like you're an idiot. You grew up in white America.
And also Ninjas versus Pirates already is probably like certainly like I guess potentially anachronistic because they're about 100 years out on different sides of the planet, I guess.
Oh yeah, this was just like this was basically our version. It was like Smash Up in that respect.
Yeah, totally.
We had other plans too.
Oh, to release expansions for different things.
Robots versus zombies, and there was going to be cavemen, I think, versus dinosaurs, and cowboys versus. I don't remember if we were going to do cowboys versus Indians.
I can see this. The certainly the Smash Up similarity there. So it's really interesting. So you changed the format of the show then from about 2014. So to begin with, you were doing this. It's really interesting. I hadn't realized that you would, because obviously you've been interview focused now such a long time.
Well, we changed the format to interviews in 2009. I changed the name and the co-host in 2014.
Oh, I see. Okay, interesting.
I just got my original co-host. She was busy with her family and stuff like that. I wasn't just had no interest to come back.
Yeah.
So then I made a friend at a board game store, and I was like, "Want to come on a podcast?" I thought I couldn't do it alone.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that certainly of its time, if you think about like where those podcasts were, when podcasts were kind of first getting going, it did certainly feel to me like they will all tend to be like double-hander or three-hander shows where there would be a group of people who will like regularly get together to talk about things. Many famous podcasts, I guess, are still like that in that kind of way. I remember that what were some of the really big ones from kind of a few years back. You got things like Pod Save America, or is it Chapo Trap House? Is that one of the ones that does like a political one that I know is like has similar guests? I think again they have pretty much static set of hosts, and then that's primarily what it's kind of about. Whereas increasingly, the format of one person interviewing someone has become like the dominant form of it. I find that quite interesting how that's changed.
I think that more people with money, like people who would normally have been doing this on radio, discovered that they could also do it on podcast, and like they weren't locked into the radio format. Like they weren't locked into being on a radio, like having their stuff presented on radio. They could just be like, what if I just presented it? What if I just recorded it, made an MP3 and sent it out there? I think to some extent it's like when like money gets involved in things, and like people with money suddenly figured it out, and suddenly all of us who were just like recording in my like the room I slept in when I was in high school, just sitting and recording like in my room on like a computer. And like I think we started making our episodes with Audacity, so like, which was free. Although actually the first episodes I think might have just been like GarageBand, and I had no idea. Like we didn't know what we were doing. We were like we were just like making it up as we went along. So I think that's why you get more of the like now like the much more produced like in one-on-one interview podcast.
Yeah, it's interesting how that's changed. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. As you say, it's like kind of matured, isn't it? It's sort of taken over from radio in many ways. And I think there is just something about having those kind of conversations. I'm very curious, though, that you were also, I mean, again, the thing about this is that in as things mature, you often lose some of the slightly innovative, chaotic edges of things. Like a really interesting example, you're talking about, for example, applying an MDA framework to like things like Monopoly or the Game of Life. These are the kind of games that today are dismissed so completely out of hand as like, oh, that's just a load of old family game stuff. That's like, to the modern gamer, that's like seems like prehistory. And so as a result, it's sort of like you've got to be some strange anthropologist to be interested in this like dusty old stuff over there. And the idea that you would kind of take them were you kind of taking them seriously then in that sense? Were you applying this framework in a serious way? Like in the sense of going, we actually want to talk about these games. We want to know how they work.
Yes. In the beginning we were serious. Like we were like semi-serious in that like we were being honest and we were trying to honestly assess the games. We weren't hobbyists. So like I didn't like, that's why I said I wasn't in the hobby yet. Like I didn't have that idea that like, Monopoly. Like, I didn't have like, I don't necessarily have that. I don't have that now, but I hadn't even like, it's just like, those were the games that I knew about.
You didn't know it. You didn't know enough about those things in order to be a snob about the family game titles, right? In that sense.
And I didn't know any. I think we did Uno. I think we did Uno. We did Life. We did like probably Parcheesi. Like we did these games because we didn't know any other games. It was hard. Actually, in the beginning of when I was Ninjaverse Pirates, when we were interviewing in 2009, in that time we actually interviewed like a lot more role-playing game designers because they were easier to acquire. Sometimes we'd be asked, people would email us and be like, "Can I be on your show?" Like, okay. And like, it was the only time when we asked for review copies, because a lot of times it was just a PDF. And so it was like, okay, well, you got to tell me something about your system. I don't know anything about it. Like, and so we'd get like a PDF and we'd read it and we'd be like, okay. And we'd play it maybe once or twice. And then it was like, but I didn't know a lot of board games. Like I didn't know a ton of board games at the time. So like I would have to have had some experience with the board games. I didn't have like as good a mind. Like now you could just tell me how a board game plays and I could talk to you about it because like I've played enough board games that I know enough about board games to just go off the cuff. But like back then it was like if you listen to me in the beginning, we wrote all our questions. Every episode was like 14 questions. We had like a few standard questions. And then we like sometimes would tweak and add our own. And my co-host, she was much more natural in the beginning. She would just like ask a follow-up and I'd be like, okay, what were the challenges that you had when you were making your game? And the person would say something, I'd be like, okay, you can ask a question now. Like because I didn't know. I was like, and that's why when I came back in 2014, I was like, well, I have to have a co-host. Because what am I going to do if the conversation stalls for a second?
Right. Okay. Because there's the fear of the silence, that the space needs to be filled in, and you're not, so at this point, confident in having that kind of natural flow that I guess you have today.
No, yeah, and then at some point I stopped writing questions, and I was like, I'll just think of them. I'll think of them on the moment.
And you found that less nerve-wracking rather than having them there, at least as a kind of backup, I guess.
Because I got better at listening. I also realized, like, at first I thought, who am I? Like, who am I that these game designers are going to waste their time talking to me? We started off, we emailed like the most indie-ish of people we could find. Because we're like, well, anybody who's made a game that's like really published, they're not going to want to talk to us because they don't know who we are. We're a bunch of nobodies. Right. And I was like I was floored. Andrew Looney's was on my show many times. And I was floored that I was like, oh, he like made a real game. And yet he's coming on my show. What the hell? And so, and then like we had Matt Leacock on in the beginning too. And like, but I would just sort of be like, why would they say yes? Like, why would they say yes to talk to me? I'm a nobody. Now I'll just tweet at anybody.
and just say, hey.
Oh, hey, Bruno Faiduti, you want to come on a podcast one day, talk about something? Like, whoever. And I thought that was like, holy shit. Even then, when I tweeted like Bruno Faiduti and I asked him, my friend Ben was like, did you really just tweet at him and say, can you come on a show? And I was like, yeah, well, what else am I going to do? But even then I was like, holy crap, he's like a big name. Now I'll just email anybody or tweet anybody. I'll be like, yo, want to come talk about it? Want to come talk about that topic on a show? Let's go.
What do you think changed there?
I just got more comfortable being a podcaster, talking about stuff. I got more comfortable talking to people. I decided that Twitter was a really good place to find guests. So like, it's like at this point I've become like a shark. Like I like just look, I just like poke my head around. I go, like somebody might say something, and I'll be like, a most recent episode I just put out the other day. Matthew Dunstan, who was designed a whole bunch of games, he like was talking. I had an episode with Crystal Mazer about what it is like to be a role-playing game writer. Like, what are the nitty-gritty about what it's like? Like, how do you get paid, and what do you like? What this, that, and the other thing. So we had an episode. Matthew Dunstan's kind of like was writing about something about like what it's like being a game designer. And I made like a reference to, hey, I just had this episode with Crystal Mazer, blah, blah, blah. And then I tweeted at him and I was like, you want to just come on the show and just talk? Like you could say what you're saying in your tweet, but like off the cuff. And like, that's how it happens. Like now I just look, anytime I see like an angle that could be an interesting show, I go, I'm going to tweet at that person and see what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, that's great, isn't it? Because absolutely, why not? Well, I mean, this is the thing I found is that it's enjoyable, right? To be asked to be interviewed. It's for most people, not everyone, but for most people. And it's an opportunity to explore your ideas, talk to someone else, bounce ideas around. That's something that I found incredibly useful. I mean, my God, I mean, it's from my side, it's been brilliant. I feel like I'm learning so much. And as a guest, I've always really enjoyed that. So I think as one, I guess, builds that confidence, you just start asking people. And it's really cool.
That's it. There's no secret. It was just not worrying about having to go through a publisher or anything like that. I find it so I am different than a lot of the other podcast people out there in board game media because I only do interviews. I'm not different than everybody. I know Ben Maddox does something very similar to me, but he has this very interesting like what 5 games would you take to the cabin?
Yeah,
thing.
It's this very specific high kind of concept format. 5 games for Doomsday, I think is the name of it, isn't it?
Yes. But he has that as like that's like the overarching sort of theme of what's going on. But he also is constantly asking questions about the people's backgrounds and their games and their life, and that he's asking all these other questions as well. But there's not a ton. I think a lot of other people who become podcasters in the board game space, a lot of times do so to like review games. And so like I'm different in that I don't review. I only interview people. In some respects, the barrier to entry on my show is lower. Like you don't have to worry about getting me a review copy of anything because I don't. It is no longer a part of what I ask for. Because in the back in the day, I used to like I just look at my shelf. I'd be like, who do I want to try to have on? I'll have Tori. Let me email Tori Neiman and talk to him about Alien Frontiers. And so what I like there is that like I'm not like the guest doesn't have to worry about like, oh well, I don't know if I can get you a review copy, or like the publisher doesn't have to worry about like getting me anything. I'm like, wow, just come on and talk. And it also frees me up in some respects because I can focus on one product, or we can just talk general. Sometimes it's like, do you want to talk about this one product? Yeah. Let's also talk about these other 3 things that you've done too, because they're interesting or they're fun.
Yeah. You get to take the conversation to go where you want it.
Anyway, any direction you want.
When you talked earlier about listening, about really listening, what does that mean?
I see you were employing the skill.
Yeah.
It is fun. I think on my show and for me at least, it is finding a place to get the guest, to want to elaborate further on things So it's listening to the thing that they're saying and then trying to keep them sort of talking about the thing, or have them sort of have that thing kind of meander a bit more. That's a really dumb answer. That's a really dumb answer. Don't cut this. Don't cut.
No, I'm going to keep this in because I think it's a really interesting question. I think the way in which you are,
what does it mean?
dare I say, struggling a little bit to answer it is because, I mean, it's a stinker of a question for starters, but I think it says something to it, right? About, I kind of know what you mean when you said meandering, and yet that's not quite right, is it? Because like meandering suggests that it's sort of all over the place. Is it something about natural flow in some way?
Something. It's something. It's about keeping the conversation going, and it's about letting the guest continue to like highlight themselves, because effectively my show is like advertisement for yourself, without like a paid advertisement. But it's like, so as you're listening to what the guest is saying, you're always trying to like find a place where you could get them to say more about something that seems interesting, and to think about like what is the guest trying to say underneath it all, or what is element of what the guest says maybe seems less not less normal, but surprising, or like out of left field, and it's something that you could like be like, hey, you just mentioned this thing, and did you ever think about this, that, and the other thing when you were designing that game? And sometimes the person's like, no, you know what, I never really thought of it. It wasn't until I put it all together that I realized, it's a hard skill. I get a lot of practice too, because I besides being a podcaster, I'm also a teacher, and I have to deal with, I'm an English teacher, and so I have to deal with students, and I deal with their college essays. And a lot of times it's a matter of listening to them and getting them to understand how to bring out something interesting about themselves, or bring out something mundane in an interesting way.
So are these like statements they're writing in order for entry to college? That's kind of that's like statements they have to make to get the university to be impressed with them, and hopefully they get through the kind of the selection process.
Exactly. So it's similar. So I get that. I do that practice a lot, where I'm like listening and I'm saying, okay, so you said this thing. Great. Now let's take this. No, don't go off to the left. Let's keep this train going a little bit, and let's see where this goes, because this could be interesting, or this could really work. Like in terms of with student writing, it's a matter of finding something that they can put together in a final product. On my show, it's really more of a matter of like, it's like the practice of moving down that track and not really worrying, because there's no like, the final product is still an episode, but like the episode nobody uses my episodes to get into college, as far as I understand.
Well,
right? Like,
you don't know. Exactly.
Oh, maybe they might.
Who knows? Exactly. Some game designer.
But anyway, like no one's using my episodes for anything. Like it's not being used evaluatively. Whereas like a college essay is being used, it's like somebody's evaluating it later.
Yeah, and they're evaluating against some pretty specific criteria with like a specific purpose. But I guess, I mean, the episodes are evaluative to some extent, I guess, even, aren't they? I mean, you talked about it's sort of free advertising for someone to kind of come on. That presumably means that there are people listening to them, and then they're making judgments or decisions, based on what they're listening to, right? At the very least, they're being influenced by how that person comes across, I guess, in future decisions.
Probably from like the consumer, from the consumer end more so.
You think so? Not the industry side?
Maybe. You know what? I would love to know if anybody is listening now, if anybody has gotten if anybody's gotten any design work because a publisher heard you on my show. I would love to know that. That would be cool. Like, I do have a lot of, I think a lot of designers, and I do have a lot of industry people that listen, not to every episode, but to, I think, specific episodes. Because I think my show is also like, the Dice Tower would have an episode where they're gonna we're gonna talk about the top 10 X, Y, and Z games, and we're gonna talk about like the games, the most interesting games that are coming out at Gen Con next week or something like that. But it's very like topical. And mine are always my episodes are always focused on either a person or a topic or a game. And so I think for the most part, like if you have no interest in Tori Neiman's, for example, if you have no interest in Tori Neiman's Alien Frontiers, then you're not going to listen to that episode probably, because you're just going to be like, well, I don't care about that game. Or if you have no interest in role-playing games, you're not going to listen to any of the episodes where I've interviewed role-playing designers. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm saying you should listen, because I think there's a lot of interesting parallels between various game design and things like. I think there's a lot of interesting parallels. There's a lot of things you could take, but I think for the most part, that's the way my episodes are used. It's like people like, oh, Taylor Schuss, I want to listen to that one because I'm really interested in the game, or I'm really interested in this person.
Like a whole designer's like body of work, for example. If you're a particular designer, you tend to like their work. They've been interviewed by you. You might be listening to your podcast because, oh, I want to dive deep, right? I mean, that sense when you interviewed me, the sense I had is that we actually went pretty far. So some interviews I've had have been, well, often by the nature of the medium, they've often been shorter. They're more like high level about, tell us a little bit about Magnate, for example. Whereas I felt like when we discussed about Magnate, we also went quite deep into really deep into the influences behind it, and like where I live even, and how the place that I live in Croydon, exactly, influenced the game, right? That was like a good example of that. So it's kind of, unlike the Dice Tower, you're not trying to go for things that are more like trending topics. They're much more like deep dives into particular people's careers. And I guess they're not especially timed with particular high point commercial things, right? It's not like you're recording an interview with a designer and then waiting until their new game is released as part of a coordinated PR effort, right? It's just more because, this would be a cool person to speak to. That'd be really interesting. Let's have the conversation.
And not to say that I don't coordinate with people. Sometimes I do get a lot of people who want to come on to talk about, to be interviewed about their Kickstarter, to talk about it. And then a lot of times people will be like, hey, could you release the episode, in August when our Kickstarter is live? And I'm like, sure, sounds good. I mean, most people are like, I mean, you can release it whenever you want. It would be really helpful to us if you released it in August or, whatever the month is. And mostly I'm like, sure, whatever you want me to release in August, I'll release in August. I can fill the time, or I don't. Sometimes I don't. I've had some months where I have one episode come out.
That's interesting. So you don't feel like you hold yourself to like a regular release schedule?
I've gone back and forth with that. At the beginning, we had a regular release schedule. I probably still have a regular release schedule listed on my website because I don't update that. I did have a regular release schedule. And then at some point, my day job, I became a teacher in 2016. Podcasting took a little bit of a hit here and there because it was just harder to put the episodes. It was harder to get the time to do the episodes because a lot of my time was devoted to becoming a better teacher. My time's still devoted to becoming a better teacher, but I'm more comfortable there. And then when the pandemic hit, I had actually almost quit. About 2020, I almost quit. I almost said, forget it. I just don't want to do this anymore. And then I interviewed the Ragnar brothers. I interviewed them in March or April of 2020. And then for a while, I was putting out 5 episodes a month. And then again, the school year, this past school year hit, and some of my months sort of would go like this. And now I'm like, I don't know. I just sort of release. Most podcasts are much better at their audience knowing when to expect an episode. I am really not good at that, and which probably limits my growth as a podcaster. It probably limits my growth. I've been popular, and I've been I'm popular as moderately popular, but I've noticed my numbers sort of. I'm making this hand motion with a wave, so nobody can see this, but this is terrible podcasting. But
it's point out. I'm going to say it's note for the listener right now. Mike is making lots of wave hand gesture. It's clearly implying to me a wave
ups
very effectively,
ups and downs. Anyway, so I go back and forth with regular release schedules. I'm not always able to do it. It's easier for me to just do it when I can.
But I mean, this is part of the thing about it being a hobby, though, right? Is that it's not like your income depends on you having a regular release schedule, and it's not even part of a wider commercial strategy. So it's not really, I guess, as important. I'm really curious to know, kind of interested why, particularly when the pandemic came along, you felt like kind of less up for doing it. Because I would say just one of the interesting things about it is almost the pandemic almost inspired me to do it a little bit, because early last year, after being on your podcast, one of the things I thought was like, I'm kind of waiting for a lot of stuff to Magnate to get done. And this is something I can do from home remotely quite easily. So after you interviewed me, I was like, you know what, I should just give this a go, because it seems like, right, I did try this. Let's try this, because I had been writing a lot of blogs. That was kind of my medium, and I do enjoy writing, but I was finding the exercise of writing just super, super, super time consuming. And I thought, well, I'm kind of going to enjoy the conversation, and then afterwards, particularly if I can get someone to edit it other than myself. I did all the initial editing, but now I get someone else to do it. It actually wouldn't be any more time consuming. I think overall it probably about nets out and about even to writing a blog post. Maybe slightly less time consuming for me now. But that was very much where I wanted to do it, and I thought it was great. So I'm interested to know why, for you, I guess you kind of felt you lost your mojo a little bit, or you lost your enthusiasm for it.
I lost the mojo early 2020, late 2019. The mojo was tailing down. I actually think between 2020, between 2019 and 20 and 2020, I think I might have released a really small number of episodes. I'm gonna look real quick because I can do that real fast. I had one in January in 2020. I had none in February. I had none in March. Yeah, the everything was kind of, I don't know. Before that, I felt like what was I like? I think I felt like, what was I doing? What am I doing this for? Like, no one's, I mean, it feels sometimes like, I'm not going to say no one's listening, because there are people who listen to me, and I don't want to be disrespectful to that. But like, I appreciate their time and ears. But I felt like, who was listening? Why am I wasting my time? Like, it's a lot of energy to put these episodes together and to find guests and to think about why this guest is interesting. I had a child at the time who was young and constantly eating up a lot of energy. My wife was pregnant with a second child. And actually the pandemic actually helped me podcast more. So you were right. The pandemic did, because it also, because I didn't have to being a teacher, it takes me like an hour, a little over an hour roughly to get to work. So I'm waking up at 5 a.m, have to be in work by 8:30, have to hit the traffic. When I get home, deal with the kiddo until the kiddo goes to bed. Then I probably have grading, and there's a lot of energy spent doing other things. And then when the pandemic hit, I think I said to myself, I don't remember if it was me or the Ragnar brothers who reached out. I forgot who reached out. I might have reached out because they were talking about Rome. They had a game about Rome, and I really like Roman history. So I was like, let me do like an episode or something like that. And I was like, let's see how this goes. And then I was like, oh, it's so much easier because I'm at home all the time. And I would wake up for my son wasn't going to daycare because we weren't sending anybody anywhere. And I was like, this is really easy to podcast. I'm home all the time. I was like, I don't need to sure, I'll stay up until midnight. Whatever. I don't have to wake up at 5. So you're right. So you are right. The podcast, the pandemic did kickstart. I think I recorded 200 episodes just in the pandemic.
Wow. So actually but
I might be lying a
well,
little bit.
I guess even if it won a week, that would got to be about 100. Like if it's become that consistent again, right? Now it's July 2022.
Every season where I have this is like a holdover from when I was the Ninjaverse Pirates. Every season is 10 episodes except for seasons 2 to 7. Because back in the day, my friend and I, we would record a whole bunch of episodes and then we would just stop recording for a little while. And so we just called it a season by But for everything from season 8 to the current season 33 is 10 episodes. So like I could just, if I know when the pandemic started, like what season the pandemic started.
Oh, that would have been April 2020. So that's just 2 years and 3 months ago.
Jeez, this is season 23. It's probably season 20. No, season 21. Yep, season 21. About season 21. So from 21 to now 33. Or from 21 to 32, which is about 110 episodes.
Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? That it's actually, that's quite a substantial portion of all the episodes you've done. So that which itself is, that I find that quite interesting. When you talk to people who the interesting thing about the Kickstarter you mentioned, and people who are coming to you sometimes and saying, look, could you release the episode around this? Do people come to you quite a lot then? Is that something you're quite happy with, that people come to you and just say, hey, we've got a game coming out, we'd love to talk to you if we can?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I don't think I've ever really said no. I mostly always say yes. Usually I'm trying to think about how the episode, like how I can come up with an interesting angle for the episode. So I learned from an error when I was back in the Universe Pirates days. We had Stephen Bonacore sent me and my co-host an email because we were probably one of the few board game podcasts out there. Now there's a lot. So sent me an email saying, hey, could I be on your show? And we were like, sure, here's our list of questions. And because he wanted to talk about Code 777, which Stronghold was putting out at the time. And he goes, hey, yeah, those are great questions, but I'm not the designer. So like, here's the questions I'd really rather talk about. And it was questions that, like, I went to his website, I went to Stronghold's website, and all the questions could be answered on the website. And I said, well, then why do I want to do the interview? Like, and we were like, well, you're not the designer, so that's not interesting to us. And so we were very like limited. We were like, in our brains, we were like, you have to be the designer. We only want to talk to the designer. And then later, I finally had Steven on the show. We talked about this actually, but I finally had him on the show, and I like pointed out my error that I like was like, you know what? I gotten better at looking at something and going, okay, that's the angle I'm going to go for. I'm going to go for this angle. This is why I think this is interesting, as opposed to sitting there and thinking, that doesn't fit. That doesn't fit my preconceived notion. I think it goes to the listen. You know, I've had like people email and they're like this 17-year-old kid designed this game. Do you want to interview me for it? You know, the kid is like, hi, you know, I had a couple of kids who were like teenagers who were like, I designed this game, and I looked at the game, and like, it may not be the game I would choose to buy. Like, I would look at it and be like, well, it seems like a pretty like mass markety style game. Like, it's not necessarily maybe a game that I personally would have purchased, but I went, but you're a teenager designing your first game. What are your influences? What are you playing? Like, how are you getting to this? People email me and are like, hey, here's my Kickstarter. Would you mind having me on your show? And I go, and I take a look at the Kickstarter, and I'm like, or look whatever details are sent to me. And a lot of times I'll be like, yeah. It takes me some time to think about like, what's the interesting angle that I'm going to approach this episode with. And so once I find that in my head, I go, okay, good. That's what I'm doing. But in a lot of cases, I just say yes, you know, and I know it's promotional for them. The only thing I ask, if you ever have me on for your Kickstarter, please include my episode somewhere in your interviews, media thingy on your Kickstarter page. Just put me up there. Just like, talk to Mike.
100%. That makes a lot of sense. I think that's really interesting, talking about the finding something kind of really interesting, because that's what I found, is that the lesson seems to be almost everyone I speak to, there is something very interesting to be teased out. There's even something to be interesting teased out that is game industry related, beyond just a person being an interesting person in general, right? What do you think that people who want to be guests on podcasts, let's say, because they're interested in the kind of promotional element, what should they be doing to help hosts find that?
The best thing I could say is I would do whatever it is that you do. somewhere within the hobby, whether you're like a game designer, a publisher, an artist, maybe you're working on a PhD, like whether you're like, I would say just do that thing that you think is, just do that thing, just keep doing that thing. And I would also say, don't be afraid to just ask. Don't be afraid to just ask, hey, could I come on your show? Bez, I don't know, do you know Bez?
Yes, I know Bez very well. Yeah.
Bez, I got an email from her back in 2014, 2015, I think, suggesting some either topics or suggesting some guests. I don't remember the email at the moment, but like Bez was like, hey, I listened to your show. I really like it. Talk about this thing, blah, blah, like gave some like feedback on the show. And like I don't remember when I first had her on, but a year or something, months or so later, I like emailed Bez and was like, hey, you design games. Do you want to come on and talk about your games? So I think like, don't be afraid to just ask to be on the show. I've had people who just are like, hey, I really want to, I had a series of episodes with Joe Slack, and he'll come back on at some point, but we did 3 short episodes together because we recorded them all in one night. They don't sound like they're recorded in one night. Magic. No, but we recorded 3 short episodes in one night, and he emailed me and said, hey, I have this idea to do these 3 episodes. Could I come on your show and do that? And so I said, yeah. Like I had Joe on before, so I knew who Joe was. But I think sometimes as long as you like, either you're doing something that somebody might notice, or you have an idea, reach out or keep on keeping on. The reaching out also is very helpful too. Like I like when people reach out because I don't always have to think of who to interview.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? Like I think is that
hey,
right?
Can I be on your show? Yeah. Excellent. Check one off for the
that's
month.
One. Yeah,
Done.
That's the thing, isn't it? That's well. I mean, this is an underrated thing. It fits into a general pattern. I would say a lot of people are very nervous to ask people for things because I think they assume I don't want to bother them. Whatever I'm doing is not as important enough. They're too important, something like that. And they don't realize that often that just by asking to do something, you're often helping someone in certain situations. And for example, this one is a good example of that, where it helps the podcaster, someone to reach out and say, hey, could we potentially do this? And that's something where it's interesting. I've had a few people ask me, and there's a few people I need to get back to actually who've asked to be on and I want to talk to. The difficulty I have a little bit is I've kind of got a bit of a plan in my head about, okay, but I want to make sure we have this constant nice smattering of people from across the industry. And I don't want to make sure it like, sometimes I'm a bit aware of like, oh, it's like all been publishers the last 3 episodes, or it's all been designers. And the whole thing is to kind of get away a bit from game designers, just because I'm really aware of that space is a little bit more explored already. And I'm trying to think, I'm trying to find people who have slightly more unusual roles in the industry. And so to anyone who's listening, who's asked to be on, that's something where that's why partly that's in my head, and I will get back to you. But it's interesting. Something else that you said as well that is something I mentioned earlier that I find really interesting is this thing about sometimes feeling like you're shouting into the void a little bit, maybe. That is something I've felt slightly, but it's interesting. On the other hand, it's amazing when people tell you, oh, actually, I do really listen. I had a guy I met at an event. I'd never met him before. And he said, I know who you are. You're James. I recognize the voice. And
that's awesome.
You do producing fun. I really enjoy it. And that was just wonderful having someone come up and say that. So as a listener, so that was really, really cool. We then chatted, and actually he play tested one of my games as well, it was a play test day, and it was just so cool, like meeting someone. And hopefully we'll see each other again at more playtesting events. And it's nice to get that little bit of feedback, isn't it? I think that's quite important. Oh yeah, go for it.
I was just saying, I had a game designer recently who tweeted at me and said, there's a blank space at the 48-minute mark of your most recent episode. This is the second most recent. This is the episode with Taylor Schuss. And it was a matter of because little background info for the listeners. The Taylor Schuss interview is one of the ones I had to redo my entire section. In my moving of the pieces, I just left like a 3-minute gap by accident. But it was nice because it told me that this person was listening. It told me at least one person was. I think having people respond to you in some way, email or some other way, and I don't have a ton of ways to respond. But like, I mean, you could tweet at me. That's one way. But like, I think having people respond to you is really cool, as long as it's always going to be like something like, hey, I listened. Hey, that was really interesting, blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, cool. You get a little validation. I'm not just doing this for my own self. Woohoo, yay. It's a double-edged sword because there are a lot of people out there who face a lot of like racist comments and misogynistic comments and stuff like that. And so then sometimes you're like, oh, I'm really glad I don't have a lot of people talking to me because, well, some people have that problem of like, they have to face racism and stuff like that. And that's like, oh, they're listening because they hate, oh, crap. Oh, so it's double-edged.
Well, the sad thing about that is that almost certainly in almost any situation, the number of people who have quietly enjoyed something and then just not mentioned it probably outnumbers massively the people who are getting in touch to basically be a dick. I mean, what other way to, think about it, to just come and, just really just for some sick pleasure, right? And I think that, well, that's probably worse. I think the most awesome thing was meeting someone in real life, because generally people in real life mostly aren't going to do that. And this is a bit of a phenomenon mostly of the internet, which is it's empowered people to come out and say things to people that they just wouldn't have dreamed saying in person, mostly.
It's empowered assholes.
It's empowered, because
and to people to act like assholes.
Because it's kind of empowered everyone, including the assholes, right? Like that's part of the problem. So you get this thing where people will come out of the woodwork to say awful things to people.
Yeah, it is that double-edged sword. On one hand, I don't think I would have ever interviewed as many international guests I've ever interviewed.
Yeah, very true.
But on the other hand, a whole bunch of people have to deal with assholes constantly. And the assholes can like make a new name and they can come back at you. Like you can't shut off that asshole for good. Whereas like, at least in person, you could walk away. You could even be like, security, please escort this asshole far away from me.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? I guess that's an internet hard problem that we're not going to solve today. I would suppose. And
I don't think it's not a problem I'm going to face too much. I'm a white guy, so I'm pretty safe from a lot of the assholes just by virtue of not being someone who's going to challenge their preconceived hateful worldview.
Yeah. What do you see the role of the kind of podcast world in the game industry? Because this is something I think about a lot. Like, is it like one of these things that's like a kind of crucial information conduit, like how BGG is sort of a bit like that? At least it seems that way sometimes. Or is it, what do you think the influence of it is?
I think it mostly is there to empower community. That's the big smart answer I'm going to give. I think it's mostly to empower community in some respects, because podcasts can, shut up and sit down, have a convention because they're a popular group of podcast, video, game content creators, right? Like they have a convention because of it. Like the Dice Tower has a convention, has a number of conventions actually. Like the Dice Tower has multiple conventions. So I think that's its main role. I think it fills the time for some people, like myself, yourself. Like it gives us something to do. It gives us some way to engage in the industry, in the hobby, in that sort of way. But I guess for the people listening, all that, I think it's a matter of building a community. It's a matter of building something that is, people can gather behind, and that what's his the Secret Cabal is a podcast. They have a meetup at Gen Con, or I don't know if they still do, but they had the last time I went to Gen Con, I know they had it. And I went to it because I was with I was with Emerson Matsuchi, and he was like, I'm going to the Secret Cabal meetup. Want to come? And I was like, okay. And so we went. That was cool. Like everybody like gathered together and like, you know, I think that's the most thing. Because I think sometimes, like, except for interviewing people who have made games or produced art or done some actual physical like work in that space, I am not presenting a ton of expertise. I might be presenting expertise right now of podcasting, but I'm not necessarily doing a ton of expertise like when I talk about games, mostly because I haven't really made a game. I've made games, but I haven't produced an actual physical game.
Yeah, well, you've made it. Of course, the Ninja and Pirates game. That is a game.
We did, yeah. I know technically we did produce it. Like there were physical copies produced. But was it like, did I like get price quotes? No, we went to like the local printer and like stuck stuff in a Ziploc bag. Like, you know, it's very like DIY.
You weren't trying to get it published and into retail stores, for example.
I didn't even know that was possible. I didn't even think that was, I was like, I don't know how you get a game into stores. We're just going to make it and put it into a bag. So I think that's really the role. I think it's about creating community.
I think it's quite powerful in that regard. And I do think it does mean that you can really get into topics as well in a level of detail that's not really possible elsewhere. I feel like even though you're writing a blog, you can put forward your view and you can put forward something pretty precise and nuanced, actually. But what you don't get is that free and easy exchange of nuanced ideas that's possible on a podcast. And I think that is quite unique.
To be fair, it's kind of fun to sit on a podcast and talk about stuff. Like, I had a college radio show for like 3 years in college, and it was super fun. Like, there, we were aiming to do more like, shock jockey, but we were aiming to be like entertaining. So this is the same. It's very similar as a podcast. You're sort of trying to be entertaining, but when you're interviewing somebody, you're less about like, because it's not instant feedback, because you have to like record it and then later people maybe react to it. You're just sort of like, you know, you're just trying to find your way of like contributing to the hobby in some way, you know, and hopefully building some kind of community with people, you know, who maybe listen to you. Maybe you have a meetup or something, or like, you know, that guy who you said came up and said hello to you and said, I recognize you. And like, you know, who knows, like in the future, maybe you end up like you see him again, maybe you end up playing games with him or who knows, like, or maybe you end up having like a little table one day at maybe a local UK Croydon, maybe board gaming event. You gather with the people who listen, and you play some games, and like, who knows, right? You make some community out of it.
Yeah. I mean, which is, you know, I think that's internet magic, isn't it? I think you can do something like that. That's very cool.
Hopefully. Yeah, that is the one great thing about the internet.
I'm very aware that we're beginning to run short a little bit of time here. So before we wrap up, I guess I'd like to ask you two kind of top tips questions. And the reason I can think it's two is because I think we've covered maybe some of it, but I'm really curious for people to hear kind of what your top 3 tips would be for not only people making games who want to get covered or interviewed in different ways, but also, I guess, for people who want to start their own podcast, right? Like, there's been this explosion in podcasts, and there is probably still a huge amount of room for more. There's always like endless new formats and new things people can try out. So first, I guess, for game creators, what are your kind of top tips for them? And then also for people who maybe want to get into podcasting.
For game creators to get yourself on a podcast, biggest thing is reach out. That's my biggest tip, is send a tweet, send an email, send an Instagram message, whatever it is. I would actually tell people who are making games, especially people who are making games and are like not the Rob Davias, who are like making games that they know are going to immediately get covered by the biggest podcasts, right? Like Dicebreaker's writing an article and Kotaku is writing an article. Like the people who are going to get covered by the biggest. For the people who are like, there's a lot of people who come on my show are like people, I don't think they're huge. Right? I think they're making games and they're doing their cool thing, but they're like much smaller indie creators. So like reach out, and especially reach out to podcasts like mine that are smaller, perhaps, because it becomes kind of a mutual thing where we kind of help each other. Like, I put out an episode with you and you give me content, which also gives you an opportunity to talk about the thing, right? The other thing is I'm on a lot of media lists because I always get I'm not going to Gen Con, but like I'm getting a ton of like Gen Con related emails now because I'm a show, and that's fine, whatever. Don't say, dear podcaster, I love your show. Could you please announce my latest Kickstarter on your news segment? I swear I listen to every minute of your show. Please announce during your news section. I don't have a news section. And that's one of those things where it makes you go like, I don't care if the email is a clearly copied and pasted. It's a generic. I don't care if it's a generic creator email, like an email to all podcasters. That's like that. That's like inauthentic blowing smoke, right? We talked about authenticity before. Like that's like an inauthentic amount of smoke you're trying to blow up my ass. Like, don't tell me, oh, you love my show. It's so great. Could I just please announce your Kickstarter on
your non-existent news segment?
On my non-existent news segment? Because you have no idea if I have one that tells me that there's a lot of shows that have very similar formats. I don't have that. And I pride myself on not having the same things that every other show has. I don't even ask people what are the last games you played, or like I don't even ask people like what got you into the hobby really anymore, because it's the most boring answer on earth. Don't reach out in a way that feels inauthentic. Like it's fine if you just want to reach out and talk about your thing. Because sometimes like I got an email, it was a generic creator email, right? For the product called Dized.
Oh, it's like no, that one. It's like
I think it was a Finnish.
It's an app tutorial system, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an app tutorial system. I got a generic email that was about dear creator, and then explained Dized, but it didn't like try to blow inauthentic smoke up my ass.
It just said, here's a thing. Are you interested in talking about it?
Here's a thing. And it was clearly an email aimed at a list. But like, guess what? I saw it. I went, well, that's interesting. And I emailed back. Right. And I've done that where I've emailed people and said, like, well, I don't have a news segment. Do you want to come on my show and be interviewed? No, I then explain what the heck. But like, I don't know. Don't be, because I know there are creators out there. I've seen people say it on Twitter. There are creators out there who would just not respond to it. They immediately bin that email. Yeah. So reach out, and don't reach out in an inauthentic way. And reach out to small podcasters. Reach out to people who aren't the biggest and the don't, if the dice tower is not covering your game, try to find someone who will cover. Those are my biggest for game creators or publishers, anybody who makes games in some respects. And also don't worry even though you are not either a designer or a publisher, that you don't have something interesting you can add. I've had a lot of artists on. I have not had artists on in a little while. I've had PhD. I've had Tanya Pobda, who's a PhD researcher on games and things. Like I've had people on who are not necessarily just creating games. I've had people on who are making things who are tangential to games, right? Maybe they're making one of the components. One of the things I liked I remember one of the early episodes was you've interviewed people who do manufacturing.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. Like I think sometimes people like that don't necessarily think they have anything to add, and you're like, but manufacturing, super duper manufacturing is really important.
Yeah, it's the thing where the game actually goes from being a set of files to being a real thing.
To a real thing. Like, so don't worry that you don't have something interesting to add, because you might have an angle that the other person might see that you don't see, or maybe you do see. And then you said for people who are making
podcasters, come on, that's very much an area of expertise for you. So
that is. I was doing the tabletop mentorship. I was mentoring somebody about making a podcast. I don't remember whatever happened to the podcast because the person never reached out again. So I don't know if it ever went anywhere. I would say for podcasters,
spoilers, it was Tom Vasel. That's not.
Spoilers. It was Tom, this little guy named Tom Vassell. No, I don't know. It wasn't Tom Vassell. Tom's very nice. Tom's a very nice guy. So one, I think for podcasters, to start a podcast, you have to be really willing to probably potentially have no listeners for a little while. You have to be willing to just be like, maybe it's just for me. I don't know. With a lot of cases with my show, with all of the things that I've done, because I also have like a secondary podcast and I have a comedy thing. I don't know who's listening, but guess what? My secondary podcast, I talk about ska music because I love it. My comedy thing, I don't make fun of reviewers, but I goof on reviewing. And like, I don't know who's listening. If it's one person, awesome. You got to do it because you like doing it. Don't worry. Don't do it because you're hoping to build an audience. You know what I mean? You want to build an audience, but don't do it because that's your goal. Do it because you like doing the thing. I would never have podcasts for what is this, 15 years, maybe?
Yeah. Must be
2009
it's at least 14?
to 2022.
Right? It's 2008 that's when you first kind of got started, depending where
2008 to 14 years. I would not have podcasts for 14 years if I didn't like doing it. Do things that you think are interesting. In the beginning, I interviewed people because there wasn't really a lot of other people interviewing people. We were like, my show is Ninja vs. Pirates is relatively unique in that respect. Now there's a lot of people interviewing people, which is why doing it because you like it helps to keep you doing it. And the same thing about being authentic as a guest, be authentic as a host, be you. That's the one nice thing about podcasts versus like the radio. Because on the radio, like on a podcast, you can just be. You don't have to perform necessarily because a lot of it could get edited later. So you could like edit out the boring parts if you don't like them. But like on the radio, you have to because I was on the radio in college and like in the radio, you have to be like performing and doing something kind of interesting because the people are going to they could change a dial really quickly. Right. Whereas like at a podcast, someone's going to kind of commit to listening perhaps.
Yeah. And well, explicitly often you put a podcast on, don't you, when you're doing something else? Certainly I know I do. A lot of the ones I listen to.
Yeah.
I do
when I drive.
Right. That exactly. And you're in a different kind of attention state sort of by design when you're playing with podcasts. So it's not like you're and you don't have such easy switching because switching between radio stations is just is very instant, isn't it? So that
right, you just
and so it's a different medium in that sense.
So I think you just got to be like do your thing and just be like authentic about it. Like just don't, especially when you're reaching out to potential guests. That's I think the other big thing is when you reach out to guests. I know Elizabeth Hargrave has posted a whole bunch about like the ways you should not reach out to guests. Like try to give as much info up front. Hey, do you want to come on my show? This is when I like to record. This is how I like to record. And if you do as much, I do a lot of the work for the guest. So like I don't require the guests to record on their end. I have at least 2 different ways of doing the recording if I need to. Hey, we could record through Zencastr. Oh, you don't have Skype? Okay, we could use Zencastr. Like for a while, I was only Skype. So people would have to be like, oh, I have to re-download Skype. I'm like, sorry. But do as much of the work up front for the guest. So, hey, do you want to come on? Like Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, is that a good time?
It's taking the thought out of it, isn't it, for them a little bit? Like it makes it just much easier. They're not having to, oh God, how do I plan this into things? It's just like, here's how it works. Just turn up at this time. This is what you need to know. All of that kind of stuff. Yeah, makes sense.
Exactly. And like, because it depends on the game designer too. I know like Elizabeth Hargrave is someone who like gets a lot of requests for interviews, which makes sense. She designed Wingspan, which is a huge game, right? Like very popular game. Like, so somebody like her, or somebody like, other people like might get a lot of requests. And so to sift through all the requests, do as much of the work as you can.
I mean, those are some absolutely fantastic tips because I think all of that is stuff that I think some of it I do already, right? and I think is useful
Produce
to me to know.
fun.
Yeah, produce fun. Hey,
Produce fun.
hey, that's the name of the show.
That's right. Oh my God. Roll credits. Roll credits. We're done.
Oh,
Are there credits? Do you have credits at the end of this?
Yeah, I've got a little credit sequence with
Okay,
a
good.
jolly little theme tune comes back. That's very much like
Nice.
part of how I like to do things.
We're producing fun.
Yeah, exactly.
There's your new song.
Then
Got it.
we've got a new jingle as well to go at the end. I'm just going to record that and then just repeat that what you just did on like endless loop at the end.
Endless loop.
That will be
over and over again.
That will be the season 3.
7 minutes.
The new season 3 credits.
7 minutes of that. Producing fun.
Yeah, I think it's great, but I do think 7 minutes might be overdoing it a little bit on loop.
Maybe. All right,
know.
6 minutes.
Just the 6. Just have a.
I'll take
You'll
6.
take 6. Okay, I'm glad we're negotiating on this now. Mike, thank you so much for talking to me today. This has been really cool. I've really enjoyed it. It's been
sweet. I've enjoyed this too.
So much fun. Thank you. It's been so much fun talking and being able just to really talk through podcasting in general. It's always good. It's always a good conversation.
Nice. Can I plug my three things before I go?
Oh yeah, plug away.
I'm gonna plug. ninjaversepirates.libsyn.com is my website. Who What Why is my podcast. Who What Why Cast is my Twitter username. If you want to find me, that's where you can find me. That is the interview portion of Mike. On Ninjaverse Pirates, the Who What embedded in that release is also sometimes a ska podcast called Why Ska, which is actually much shorter, and it's just about me and my like history and like love of ska music. And so whatever I can remember from my past, sometimes I have my friends on. So I've only put out like 4 episodes of that right now, but and then the last thing at Giuseppoli, which I think it's actually misspelled. It's Guizeppole. And on YouTube, it's called Meeples and Meatballs. It is me as a New Yorker, sort of Italianish New Yorker, doing reviews. There is one rule. I came up with 3 rules originally, and I've broken 2 of them, and one of them is the only rule that I've actually kept. The one rule, it's all comedy. The one rule is you will learn nothing by the end of the episode. They're very short. You will learn nothing about the game. That is a rule. That is a rule in the Meeples and Meatballs, that you must learn 0 about the game. But they are fun to make.
I can imagine they're tremendous fun to make. I imagine there are lots of little game tropes that you can have tremendous fun with.
And it's not me making fun of reviewers. It's me like just having fun within the space of review. Especially because I don't review. So
there's a lot you can be playful with there, isn't there? Like, I think I've seen some of those videos. They are very funny. So I recommend people very much check them out.
Absolutely. And Who What Why, check that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And producing fun.
Fantastic.
If you're already listening to it.
But then you're already listening to that one already, so that's already plugged by implication, I guess. Mike, thank you so much. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Well, thank you.
Let's speak again sometime soon.
Agreed. Let's go. We're producing fun. We're producing fun.
Producing Fun is produced by Nailing. If you enjoyed the show, follow us on Spotify, Stitcher, or other major podcasting platforms. Remember, Producing Fun is also a product, and it thrives on feedback. So please leave a review wherever possible, or simply send me your feedback directly. You can message me on Twitter at NailerJames, or write me an email, james@nailergames.com. Until next time.
We're producing fun.